Welcome back to Secrets Exposed. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. You're the reason these stories worth sharing. Tell us where you're watching from, city or country. We're amazed by how far these tales reach. To get daily new and amazing stories for you, subscribe our channel and press bell icon. All right, let's begin. Rain tapped softly against the cab window as the vehicle rolled to a stop in front of the Stravik house. Kalen Stravik stepped out, his boots hitting the wet pavement with a dull thud. The air was crisp, heavy with the scent of damp earth. And for a moment he just stood there, his duffel bag hanging from his shoulder. He had imagined this night for months, walking through that door, seeing Eloan's bright smile, hearing her shout, "Daddy," before running into his arms. He pictured Muriel too, her eyes filling with tears of relief as she welcomed him home. The image had carried him through sleepless nights in dusty hotel rooms and long flights across oceans. Tonight was supposed to be the payoff, the happy reunion after all the loneliness. But as he reached the front step, something unsettled him. The house looked the same, the lights glowing behind drawn curtains, but it felt different. Too still, too quiet. No flicker of the television in the living room. No sound of soft music or Eloan's laughter. Just silence, punctuated by the faint hum of pipes in the walls. Kalen slid his key into the lock, turning it slowly. He wanted to surprise them, to see the joy in their faces. The door opened without a creak, and he stepped inside, leaving his wet footprints on the hardwood floor. The living room was neat, almost staged. Toys were tucked away, the coffee table clear. The sofa cushions sat untouched, as though no one had been there all evening. His brow furrowed. He set the duffel down gently, his ears straining. Then it came. A sound, faint, distant, but unmistakable. A muffled cry. Kalen froze. For a moment, he wondered if he had imagined it, just his tired mind playing tricks. But then it came again, clearer this time. A sharp, high-pitched scream, the kind no father could mistake. Eloan. The bag slipped from his hand, thudding against the floor. He moved instinctively, his boots striking fast against the wooden stairs. Each step brought the sound closer, louder, until it filled his ears. His chest tightened, a cold fear clawing its way through him. The scream wasn't playful. It was desperate, panicked. He reached the top of the stairs and turned toward the hallway. The bathroom door was shut, locked from the inside. Behind it, water sloshed violently against porcelain. Another scream, Eloan's voice, ragged, pleading. Kalen's pulse hammered. He slammed his fist against the door. Eloan, no answer, only splashing. Then a man's voice, muffled, harsh. Kalen didn't think, he acted. His shoulder crashed into the door. Pain shot through him, but the wood cracked. Again, harder. The frame splintered, giving way with a violent crack. The door burst open, slamming against the tiled wall. The scene inside froze him for half a second. Eloan, his little girl, flailed in the bathtub, wrists bound with the cord of the hairdryer. Her face was red, her eyes wild with terror, water splashing as she tried to push herself up. But a hand forced her down, a man's hand. The man was broad-shouldered, mid-30s, with a smirk curling into surprise as Kalen stormed in. His grip on Eloan's head pressed her beneath the water. "Get away from her!" Kalen's roar echoed, shaking the small bathroom. The man jerked back, slipping on the slick tiles. Eloan gasped, thrashing above the surface, her small lungs gulping air. In the hallway, Muriel stood frozen. Her hand covered her mouth, her body trembling, her eyes wide with horror. She didn't move, didn't scream, didn't run. Kalen lunged, water soaking his clothes as he yanked Eloan out of the tub. She clung to him, coughing, sobbing, her whole body shaking. His eyes shot toward the stranger, rage boiling in every muscle. But the man was already scrambling, slipping past him, bolting through the hall. Kalen didn't chase. He held Eloan tight, his heart pounding, his mind a storm of fury and confusion. His daughter was safe in his arms, but the question screamed louder than the rain outside. What had just happened? Who was that man? And why was Muriel standing there, silent, as though she already knew the answer? The chapter ends with Kaylin's trembling voice whispering into Alohan's wet hair. Daddy's here. You're safe. I promise. Alohan's tiny body clung to Kaylin, her wet clothes sticking to his shirt. Her sobs came in gasps, her chest rising and falling in frantic bursts. Kaylin held her tighter, shielding her from the cold air of the bathroom, his own heartbeat crashing like thunder in his ears. He lifted her out into the hallway, his steps heavy but steady. Muriel stood frozen near the wall, her back pressed against it as though she could disappear into the plaster. Her eyes darted between Kaylin and the empty space where the man had been moments earlier. Kaylin's voice was raw, sharp with fury. Who was that? Muriel's lips parted, but no words came out. Her hands trembled, clutching at the thin fabric of her robe. She shook her head quickly, her mouth opening again, closing, then opening once more, but only silence spilled. Alohan buried her face against Kaylin's chest. Her small voice broke through the thick silence, trembling with fear. Daddy, he pushed me under. He said I had to stay quiet. Mommy let him in. The words stabbed like knives. Kaylin froze mid-step. He lowered his gaze to Alohan's tear-streaked face, her lashes clumped with water, her lips trembling. Slowly, he turned his head toward Muriel. His stare was colder than she had ever seen. Is that true? He asked, each word heavy with restrained rage. Muriel's knees nearly buckled. She raised her hands as if to defend herself. Kaylin, please, it's not what you think. Not what I think. His voice thundered, cutting her off. Alohan flinched in his arms, and he softened his tone instantly, pressing her head gently against his shoulder. To Muriel, however, his eyes burned like fire. Our daughter was drowning in the tub, tied up begging for air. A stranger in my house had his hand on her head. And you're standing here telling me it's not what I think. Tears spilled from Muriel's eyes. She pressed her palms together as if begging. I didn't know he would hurt her. I swear I didn't. He said he just wanted to see me. Kaylin's nostrils flared. He shifted Alohan in his arms, moving past Muriel without another word. He carried Alohan to her bedroom, where the air was warm and safe, decorated with drawings pinned to the walls. He set her down gently on the bed, wrapping her in a thick blanket. She shivered, clutching the edges like a lifeline. Daddy's here, he whispered, brushing damp strands of hair away from her forehead. His voice cracked, softer now. No one's going to hurt you again. Her small hand clutched his wrist, refusing to let go. Don't leave me. I won't. His voice was steady, though inside his rage threatened to tear him apart. Kaylin stayed until her sobs quieted and her breathing slowed into uneasy sleep. He stood, watching her for a long moment, his jaw tight. The innocence in her face made his chest ache, and deep down, a dark promise settled in his mind. He stepped back into the hallway. Muriel waited near the doorframe, her cheeks wet with tears, her voice trembling. Kaylin, please. I didn't think he would. I thought he loved me. I didn't know. Kaylin's glare cut her down to silence. You brought him here, he said, his tone low, almost calm. That calmness was worse than his shouting. It carried weight. Finality. You let him near her. Muriel shook her head, panic rising in her chest. I'm sorry. Please, I swear I'll fix this. But Kaylin didn't wait. He brushed past her, heading downstairs, his heavy footsteps echoing through the still house. At the bottom, he stopped by the table. His hands trembled for the first time, not from fear, but from a storm inside him that words couldn't capture. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and stared at the screen. His thumb hovered, hesitant for only a moment. Then he dialed a number, one he hadn't called in years. The line clicked. A voice answered, calm, cold, and patient. Kaylin's voice was steady, as though all the chaos had been locked behind a steel door. It's me. Handle this tonight. He ended the call, his reflection staring back at him in the darkened window. His chest rose and fell. In the silence, one thought cut through every other. This wasn't over. The house was silent, too silent for what had just unfolded. The rain outside had softened to a drizzle, but inside the Stravik home, tension pressed down like a heavy fog. Kaylin sat at the edge of Alohan's bed, his eyes locked on her sleeping face. Her breathing was uneven, her lips parted slightly, as though she might wake at any moment from a nightmare. Every few seconds, her body twitched, a tiny tremor that made Kalen's fists tighten. He had seen cruelty before. Overseas, he had watched grown men break under violence. But nothing compared to the sight of his own daughter, bound and gasping for air in her own home. That image was burned into him, and he knew it would never leave. Down the hall, Muriel stood by the doorway, wringing her hands. Her robe clung to her damp skin, her hair tangled from the humidity of the bathroom. She wanted to speak, to explain, but every time she opened her mouth, the weight of Kalen's silence crushed her back into silence. Finally, she whispered, her voice cracking, "Kalen, please say something." He turned his head slowly, his expression unreadable. His eyes, however, carried a fire she had never seen before. "Go downstairs." Her lips parted, trembling. Now." His voice wasn't raised, but it cut sharper than any yell. Muriel backed away, nearly stumbling into the wall before retreating down the staircase. Kalen remained where he was until he was certain Aloan was safe, asleep beneath the blanket. Only then did he rise and follow. In the kitchen, Muriel waited, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. When she saw him enter, she nearly rushed forward, but stopped when she saw the cold distance in his eyes. "Who was he?" Kalen asked, his tone flat. Muriel's hands trembled. His name is Alaric. He came into my life when you were gone. I was lonely. I didn't think it would go this far." Kalen leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. His gaze didn't soften. "And you thought it was fine to bring him into our home?" Around Aloan, her throat tightened. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I swear, Kalen, I didn't know he would hurt her. I thought he cared about me. I thought he would never." Her voice cracked, dissolving into sobs. "I was stupid. I was wrong. Please believe me." Kalen stared at her for a long moment, his jaw locked, then shifted his eyes toward the dark window. The reflection showed his own stern face, a man who had seen too much to accept excuses. "Stupid doesn't tie up an 8-year-old girl," he muttered. Muriel's sobs grew louder. She collapsed into the chair, her face buried in her hands. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then, faintly from somewhere outside, a car door slammed. Muriel's head shot up, fear flashing across her face. Kalen's phone buzzed on the counter. He didn't move at first. The sound filled the room like a warning bell. When he finally reached for it, his expression remained stoic. One message glowed on the screen. "It's done. He won't be coming back." Muriel's eyes widened. She covered her mouth with a trembling hand. "Kalen, what did you do?" He slipped the phone back into his pocket, his face giving nothing away. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "I protected my family." Muriel shook her head, panic rising in her chest. No, you don't mean you didn't." Kalen stepped closer, his eyes narrowing, his voice low but firm. "You brought him here. You let him touch her. Whatever happened to him, that's on you." Muriel collapsed against the table, her sobs breaking into gasps. Her entire body shook as the realization sank in. Alaric Dravorn was gone, not just gone from the house, but from the world. Kalen poured himself a glass of water, his movements deliberate, controlled. He took a sip, set the glass down, and looked at her one last time. "This ends tonight," he said quietly. "Do you understand me?" Muriel's tear-filled eyes met his. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Yes." Kalen turned, climbing the stairs back to Aloan's room. As he disappeared, Muriel crumpled fully to the floor, sobbing into her hands. The truth weighed on her like a mountain. Not only had she betrayed her marriage, but she had invited destruction into her home, and now, something darker was unfolding in its place. Upstairs, Kalen sat in the dim glow of Aloan's nightlight, listening to her soft breathing. He closed his eyes, his mind steady, his heart hardened. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Morning light filtered weakly through the blinds, casting pale stripes across the living room floor. The house smelled faintly of damp wood and soap, remnants of the chaos from the night before. But the silence that filled the air now was heavier, like the calm after a storm that promised another wave was coming. Kalen sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee in his hand. He hadn't slept. His eyes were fixed on nothing, steady and unblinking, as if replaying every detail of the night in his mind. His broad shoulders were hunched forward, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the mug just enough to keep from shaking. Footsteps creaked softly on the stairs. Muriel appeared, her robe clutched around her, her eyes swollen from hours of crying. Her face was pale, lips dry, and she looked more like a ghost than the woman he had married. She hesitated at the bottom step, watching him. The air between them was so thick it nearly choked her. Finally, she whispered, her voice fragile. "Kalen, please talk to me." His eyes shifted to her, cold and sharp. He didn't answer. He simply took another slow sip of his coffee. Muriel stepped forward, her voice trembling. "I know I made a mistake. I know I destroyed everything. But I didn't know he would. I didn't know he would hurt her. I thought he loved me, Kalen. I thought he cared." Her voice cracked into sobs. She pressed her hands together, as if praying. "Please don't hate me. Don't take Aloan away from me. I'll do anything to fix this." Kalen set the mug down on the table with a soft thud. His silence was more terrifying than shouting. Slowly, he rose to his feet. His height towered over her, his shadow stretching across the floor. "You let him in," he said finally, his voice low, almost calm. "You brought him here." Muriel's knees buckled as she collapsed onto the floor. She grabbed at his leg, sobbing into the fabric of his pants. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know." Kalen stepped back, forcing her hands to slip from him. His stare cut through her like ice. Sorry doesn't untie her hands. Sorry doesn't stop her screams. Her sobs echoed through the room, desperate and broken. She crawled toward him again, falling to her knees, clutching at his hands. "Kalen, please don't end this family. Don't let Aloan grow up hating me. Please, give me one more chance. I'll change. I'll be better. Just don't take her away." Kalen's eyes narrowed. He studied her for a long moment, his silence deliberate. Then, slowly, he pulled his hands free from her grip and walked past her. Muriel spun around on the floor, her voice ragged. "What happened to him? What did you do? Where is Alaric?" Kalen stopped in the doorway. Without turning, his voice came out calm and chilling. "He won't be coming back." Her breath caught. Her body stiffened as the words sank in. She clutched her chest, shaking her head violently. No, you can't mean you didn't." "Kalen." He turned his head, just enough for her to see the steel in his eyes. "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." Muriel's sobs grew harsher, her body trembling. She realized in that moment just how far gone Alaric was, and just how terrifyingly calm Kalen had become. Upstairs, a soft sound interrupted, Aloan's voice calling weakly. "Daddy." Kalen's expression softened instantly. He left Muriel, crumpled on the floor, and ascended the stairs. Aloan sat up in bed, her hair messy, her eyes puffy from the night before. She looked so small, clutching her blanket like it was her only shield. Kalen knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Dad, is he gone?" she whispered. Kalen nodded. "He's gone. He'll never hurt you again." Aloan leaned against him, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. His voice lowered to a promise, one he meant with every fiber of his being. "You're safe now. As long as I'm here, no one will ever touch you again." But as he held her, his mind was already racing. Because this wasn't just about safety. This was about debt, about unfinished business. And though Aloan would never know it, the man who had vanished wasn't just her mother's lover. He was the key to a secret Kalen had buried for years. And now, that secret was clawing its way to the surface. The morning dragged on with an unnatural stillness. The rain had stopped outside, but the house felt locked in storm clouds of its own. Kalen moved through it like a shadow, his presence filling every room without a word. Muriel sat at the dining table, her face buried in her hands. Every so often she looked up toward the stairs, straining to hear Aloan's voice. But the silence from upstairs only made her heart pound harder. She wanted to run to her daughter, to hold her, to prove she was still her mother. Yet fear kept her nailed to the chair. Kalen descended the stairs, his footsteps deliberate. His face was expressionless, but his eyes, sharp and unyielding, carried a weight that made Muriel shrink back in her seat. He placed his phone on the table and pulled out the chair opposite her. For a long moment, he just stared. The ticking clock on the wall was the only sound. Finally, Muriel broke the silence, her voice hoarse from crying. "Kalen, please tell me what happened to him." Kalen leaned back, his broad frame casting a shadow across the table. His tone was measured, calm, too calm. "He's not coming back." Muriel shook her head, tears welling. "That's not an answer. Did you kill him?" Kalen's gaze hardened. "Do you really think I'd let him walk out after what he did to Aloan?" Her breath caught, and for a moment the room spun around her. She clutched at the table edge, fighting the panic threatening to overwhelm her. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "I thought he loved me. I thought." Kalen cut her off, his voice rising for the first time. "You thought wrong. You thought a stranger could replace me. You thought you could let him near our daughter. And now you want me to feel sorry for you." Muriel broke down again, pressing her hands against her face, her sobs raw. "I made a mistake, Kalen. A terrible mistake. But you don't understand. He wasn't just anyone." Kalen's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, trembling, as though even saying the words would bring danger back into the room. "He told me he used to know people from your past. He said he'd seen you before, overseas, but I didn't believe him. I thought it was just a story." Kalen's jaw clenched, a flicker of something dark flashing in his eyes. He leaned forward slowly, his voice low, controlled. "What exactly did he tell you?" Muriel shook her head quickly. "Nothing detailed, just that he had crossed paths with soldiers. That he'd done things he wasn't proud of. That he carried secrets. He never said names. I swear, Kalen, I didn't think it had anything to do with you." Kalen sat back, his mind racing. The pieces were aligning in ways Muriel couldn't see. To her, Alaric was just a mistake, a lover gone wrong. But to Kalen, the mention of overseas, of soldiers, was no coincidence. Muriel wiped her face with trembling hands, her voice cracking. "Please, tell me you didn't plan this. Tell me it was just an accident." Kalen's stare bore into her. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence told her more than words ever could. Her stomach dropped. For the first time, she wondered if she had ever truly known the man she married. Kalen rose from his seat, towering over her. He picked up his phone and slid it into his pocket. His voice was steady, quiet, but filled with finality. "You brought him into our home, and you let him touch her. That's all I need to know." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Muriel trembling at the table. Upstairs, Kalen opened Aloan's door gently. She stirred awake, her small eyes blinking up at him. Her voice was weak, but steady. "Daddy, is Mommy in trouble?" Kalen froze, the innocence of the question cutting through his hardened exterior. He knelt beside her bed, smoothing her hair back. "No," he whispered. "Mommy made mistakes. But you don't need to worry about that. You just need to rest. Daddy's got everything under control." Aloan's eyes softened, trusting him completely. She leaned into his arms, her breathing steadying as she drifted back to sleep. Kalen sat there for a long time, his eyes fixed on the window. His daughter was safe for now, but Alaric's shadow stretched farther than Muriel could ever imagine. And Kalen knew the truth would come crashing down soon. The day crawled forward, but the Stravik home never shook the weight of the night before. Aloan slept on and off, her fragile body still exhausted from terror. Kalen stayed near her room most of the time, silent and watchful, while Muriel drifted through the house like a shadow, too scared to speak, too guilty to leave. By late afternoon, the silence broke with the buzz of Kalen's phone. He picked it up quickly, his expression unreadable. Muriel, who was sitting on the couch with her knees pulled to her chest, stiffened. She watched him carefully, her breath catching as he opened the message. His jaw tightened. A single line glowed on the screen. "Debt settled. Don't contact again." Kalen's thumb hovered over the phone. His eyes narrowed, his chest rising with slow, controlled breaths. He slid the phone back into his pocket and turned toward the window, his reflection staring back at him with a darkness Muriel couldn't ignore. She swallowed hard. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Ooh, who was that?" Kaylin didn't answer. "Kaylin, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "You said almost nothing since last night. I deserve to know what's happening. I deserve to know what you've done." He turned toward her, his eyes sharp, his expression carved from stone. "You deserve nothing," he said coldly. The words pierced her, but desperation pushed her forward. She slid off the couch, kneeling on the floor as tears streamed down her face. "I was wrong. I'll let him in. I know I destroyed everything, but you're scaring me more than he ever did. At least tell me why him? Why did you know exactly who to call? Why did you act like this wasn't a surprise?" Kaylin stepped closer, his boots echoing softly against the floorboards. He stopped just inches from her, towering over her small, shaking form. "You think last night was random?" His voice was calm, but laced with menace. "You think he just showed up in our home by chance?" Muriel's tears froze. She lifted her face slowly, horror dawning in her eyes. What do you mean?" Kaylin leaned down, his gaze burning into hers. "I knew him long before you ever did. His name isn't new to me. Alaric Dravorn. He's been on my list for years." Muriel's lips parted in shock. She shook her head violently, her words stumbling out. No, that's not possible. You've been away. You couldn't have known." Kaylin straightened, his voice cutting like steel. "I knew. I tracked him. And when I saw you falling into his arms while I was gone, I didn't stop it." Her breath caught in her throat, a strangled sob escaping. She pressed her hand to her chest, unable to comprehend. You let me? You let him near me? Near Aloan?" Kaylin's expression hardened. "I needed him close. I needed him in this house. And I knew you'd open the door." The room seemed to collapse around her. She staggered back, clutching the edge of the couch for balance. "You're saying you planned this?" Kaylin didn't answer immediately. His silence was worse than words. Finally, he said, low and steady. "He owed me a debt, one he couldn't escape. And last night, that debt was paid." Muriel's sobs broke into hysteria. She shook her head over and over, her hair falling wildly around her tear-stained face. No, Kaylin, please, you can't mean you used us. Used her for your revenge." Kaylin's face twitched for the first time, a crack in his armor. His eyes flickered with something, guilt or maybe rage turned inward. But just as quickly, the mask returned. "I protected Aloan," he said firmly. "That's all that matters." Muriel collapsed to the floor, clutching her stomach as though the truth itself had punched the air from her lungs. She saw it now. The calmness in his eyes, the precision in his actions, the way he had known exactly what to do. It hadn't been the chaos of a father saving his child. It had been the precision of a man executing a plan. Upstairs, Aloan stirred, her soft voice breaking through the tension. "Daddy." Kaylin's head turned instantly, his features softening at once. Without another word to Muriel, he climbed the stairs, leaving her sobbing on the floor. He entered Aloan's room, sitting on the edge of her bed. She looked up at him sleepily, her eyes filled with trust. "Will it always be safe now?" she whispered. Kaylin's voice was tender, calm. "Yes, little one. No one will ever hurt you again." But deep inside, he knew the truth. Safety had never been the point. Revenge had, and the game was only halfway finished. The hours after Kaylin's confession passed like a blur, but Muriel couldn't sit still. Every corner of the house felt hostile. Every creak of the floorboards a reminder that her husband had become someone she no longer recognized. She sat at the dining table, her hands trembling as she scrolled through her phone. The name Alaric Dravorn burned in her mind. Kaylin had known him before. Overseas. That meant there was more to the story than betrayal and jealousy. She needed to understand what Kaylin wasn't telling her. Her fingers hovered over the search bar. She hesitated, fear prickling at her skin. If Kaylin caught her digging, she wasn't sure what he would do. But the need to know overpowered her hesitation. She typed the name. At first, nothing. But then, an old news article. Grainy photographs, dated years ago, of armed men in desert fatigues. The headline chilled her. Private security contractor accused of abandoning team during raid. Muriel's throat tightened as she read. The article mentioned a botched mission overseas. Men killed. A survivor accused another contractor of betrayal, a man named Alaric Dravorn. Her pulse raced. She scrolled faster, eyes darting across every line. There it was. One of the men killed had been identified as the Los Stravic. Her heart sank. The Los. Kalen's brother. The pieces snapped together like a cruel puzzle. Alaric wasn't just a fling, wasn't just a mistake. He was the man responsible for Kalen's brother's death. And Kalen had used her infidelity as bait to drag that man back into his orbit. The phone slipped from her trembling hands, clattering against the floor. The sound echoed through the silent house. Footsteps thudded above her, Kalen's. She scrambled to pick up the phone, her fingers fumbling, her heart slamming against her ribs. She shoved it into her pocket just as Kalen appeared at the top of the stairs, his sharp gaze locking onto her instantly. "What was that?" he asked, his voice calm but edged. "Nothing," she stammered, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I dropped something." Kalen descended slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. He stopped at the bottom step, studying her. The silence stretched unbearably. Finally, he walked past her into the kitchen. Muriel exhaled shakily, relief flooding her body, but it didn't last. From the kitchen, Kalen's voice rang out. "You've been reading about him, haven't you?" Her stomach dropped. She turned slowly, her face pale. I needed to understand." Kalen stepped back into the room, his expression unreadable. "And now you do." Muriel's lips trembled. "The Los. Your brother. Alaric betrayed him." Kalen's jaw clenched. For a moment, raw pain flickered across his eyes, quickly buried beneath steel. "Yes, and you brought that man into my home, into Aloan's life." Tears spilled down Muriel's cheeks. "I didn't know. If I had known." "You didn't care to know." Kalen cut her off. His voice rose, sharp and cold. "You wanted comfort. You wanted someone to tell you sweet lies while I was gone. You didn't care what kind of man he was." Muriel collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. "I never wanted this. I never wanted Aloan to get hurt. Please, Kalen, please believe me." But Kalen's face remained stone. His silence was more suffocating than her guilt. Finally, he spoke, his words precise and chilling. "You can cry all you want, Muriel. But remember this. Alaric's blood is on your hands just as much as mine." Her sobs grew louder, shaking her body. The truth pressed down like a crushing weight. Her betrayal hadn't just destroyed her marriage. It had triggered a chain of vengeance that had been years in the making. Upstairs, Aloan called softly again, her small voice fragile. Kalen turned his back on Muriel, heading up the stairs without another glance. Muriel sat alone, broken, her tears dripping onto the table. But as her sobs slowed, something darker stirred inside her. She had uncovered part of the truth, enough to terrify her, enough to make her realize Kalen was no longer just her husband. He was something else now, something dangerous. And if she didn't act soon, she feared she might lose more than her marriage. She might lose her life. The night settled heavy over the Stravic home. Outside, the street lamps buzzed faintly, their dim glow filtering through the blinds. Inside, the silence was suffocating, broken only by the soft ticking of the living room clock. Muriel sat at the edge of the couch, her hands trembling in her lap. Every few minutes, her eyes flicked toward the staircase, where Kalen had disappeared hours ago. He hadn't come down since, and she couldn't tell if that was a mercy or a warning. Her mind replayed everything she had uncovered. Alaric wasn't just a lover. He was the man tied to Thalas's death. Kalen had used her, manipulated her weakness, and let their daughter be endangered, all to pull Alaric back into his grip. The thought made her stomach twist. She couldn't stay still. Rising to her feet, she crept into the kitchen. The dim light above the sink flickered softly. On the counter sat Kalen's phone. She froze, staring at it like it was a live weapon. If she could see who he had called, maybe she'd understand how deep this went. Maybe she could protect Aloan before it was too late. Her fingers hovered above the device. She reached for it, Looking for something? The voice froze her blood. Kalen stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his broad frame blocking the exit. His eyes were dark, his expression unreadable. He had moved so quietly she hadn't heard him approach. Muriel's throat tightened. She forced a weak smile, her voice shaky. I just wanted to make tea. Kalen stepped forward slowly, his boots echoing against the tiles. Tea doesn't require my phone. Her knees threatened to buckle. Kalen, I was just... Don't lie to me, he interrupted, his voice sharp but quiet, like a blade pressed to her skin. He picked up the phone, slipping it into his pocket. You think you're smart enough to uncover things I don't want you to see? Tears welled in Muriel's eyes. She shook her head frantically. No, I swear I wasn't. Kalen leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. You've already seen too much. Don't make the mistake of digging deeper. Her breath hitched, her body trembling. For a moment, she thought he might strike her. But instead, he turned and walked past, leaving her frozen in place, her heart hammering against her ribs. When he was gone, Muriel collapsed against the counter, gasping for air. She pressed her hands to her face, sobs racking her body. She had never felt so small, so powerless. But somewhere inside the terror, a seed of resolve began to form. If Kalen was capable of orchestrating something like this, of sacrificing even his own daughter's safety for revenge, then she couldn't just sit and wait for whatever came next. She had to act. She wiped her tears and steadied her breathing. She couldn't fight him head on. He was too strong, too controlled. But maybe she could find another way. Her eyes flicked toward the landline phone on the wall. It hadn't been used in years, but it still worked. If she could just make a call when Kalen wasn't watching. The sound of footsteps upstairs snapped her out of the thought. She rushed back to the couch, sitting rigidly, pretending as though she hadn't moved at all. Moments later, Kalen descended, his expression unreadable as always. He carried Aloan in his arms, the little girl half asleep against his chest. Muriel's heart ached at the sight. Aloan clung to Kalen, her trust absolute. To her, he was the protector, the one who saved her. She didn't know the darkness behind his calm eyes. Kalen glanced at Muriel briefly, then walked past her without a word, carrying Aloan upstairs again. The silence he left behind was deafening. Muriel's tears returned, but this time they burned. She realized the cruelest truth of all. Aloan loved him without question. If Muriel tried to reveal what she had learned, no one would believe her. Not her daughter, not anyone. She sank back into the couch, staring blankly at the wall, her voice barely a whisper. What have you done, Kalen? And what will you do next? The clock ticked on, and in that suffocating silence, Muriel knew. The situation was only getting worse. The next day dragged on with an unbearable weight. The house was quiet, but Muriel's nerves were on fire. Every sound, the creak of a floorboard, the soft hum of the refrigerator, made her flinch. Kalen moved through the home like a soldier on patrol, calm, precise, always alert. Muriel knew she couldn't keep living like this. The truth was too dangerous to ignore, and Kalen's silence was more terrifying than his words. He had orchestrated Alaric's disappearance, admitted he had known him long before, and all but confessed that revenge had been his motive. If Muriel didn't find help, she was certain she would be next. She waited for her moment. By late afternoon, Kalen had taken Aloan upstairs for a nap. Muriel heard his footsteps pacing the hallway, then finally the soft creak of the master bedroom door shutting. She held her breath, counting the minutes. When the house seemed still, she crept into the kitchen. Her eyes locked onto the landline phone mounted on the wall. Her hand shook as she lifted the receiver. Her voice was barely a whisper as she dialed. Please, please work. The dial tone rang through. Relief surged. She pressed in the numbers quickly. Her sisters, the only person she could trust. The line clicked. A voice answered. Hello. Rena, it's me, Muriel whispered, her words tumbling out in a rush. Please, you have to listen. I don't have much time. Kalen, he's not the man you think. He's dangerous. He planned everything with Alaric. A shadow fell across the kitchen floor. Muriel's stomach dropped. She turned slowly. Kalen stood in the doorway, silent, his eyes locked on hers. The receiver slipped from her trembling hand, swinging against the wall with a hollow clack. Rena's muffled voice echoed faintly through the line. "Muriel? Hello? Are you there?" Kalen stepped forward, his presence filling the room. He lifted the receiver calmly, pressed the button to cut the call, and set it back in place. His movements were deliberate, controlled, terrifying in their restraint. Muriel backed against the counter, her chest heaving. "Kalen, please." "I wasn't." "You weren't what?" he asked softly. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but his eyes burned with quiet fury. "You weren't calling for help? You weren't betraying me again?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I was scared. I just needed someone to talk to. You won't tell me the truth. You won't." Kalen's hand slammed against the counter beside her, the sound cracking through the air. She flinched, her sobs breaking. "The truth," he said, his voice dropping lower. "The truth is that Alaric is gone. The truth is that I protected this family when you wouldn't. And the truth is that every time you reach outside this house, you put Aloan in more danger." Muriel's breath hitched, her voice breaking into a whisper. "What are you going to do to me?" For the first time, Kalen's face softened, but not with mercy, with something colder. He leaned closer, his voice low, measured. "What happens to you depends on what you do next." Her sobs quieted, replaced by a suffocating silence. His words weren't a threat, they were a sentence. He had put her fate entirely in her own hands, but in a way that made her feel like she had none at all. Kalen straightened, pulling the phone cord from a wall in one swift motion. The line went dead. He coiled the cord and set the receiver on the counter. His tone was calm again, as though nothing had happened. "Aloan's awake. Get yourself together. She doesn't need to see you like this." He turned and walked out, his footsteps steady, his shoulders broad and unyielding. Muriel slid down against the counter, her legs giving out. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing silently, the taste of fear sharp on her tongue. Her sister had heard her voice, just enough to know something was wrong. That was her only hope now. But as Muriel sat there, trembling, one thought haunted her. Kalen had eyes everywhere. And if he sensed even the smallest betrayal again, he might not give her another warning. Upstairs, Aloan's voice called softly for her father. Kalen's calm reply carried down the stairs, soothing, protective, almost gentle. To Aloan, he was still her hero. To Muriel, he was becoming something else entirely. The following morning, sunlight spilled weakly across the Stravik home, but it did nothing to warm the cold that had settled inside. Muriel sat at the kitchen table, hollow-eyed, her fingers nervously tracing circles on the wood. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Kalen's face in the doorway, catching her with the phone in her hand. Upstairs, Aloan laughed softly as Kalen helped her brush her hair. The sound should have been comforting, but to Muriel it twisted like a knife. Their daughter adored him, trusted him completely, and that blind devotion only deepened the terror building in her chest. By midday, a knock shattered the quiet. Muriel's heart leapt. She turned sharply toward the front door. Kalen's footsteps echoed down the stairs as he appeared, calm, composed, as if he'd been expecting it. He opened the door. Rena stood there, Muriel's sister. Her eyes darted past Kalen, locking instantly onto Muriel. Concern flashed across her face. "Muriel, I heard your voice yesterday. You sounded terrified. What's going on?" Muriel rose quickly, her hands trembling. "Rena," but Kalen's voice cut in, calm, steady. "She's fine. You must have misunderstood." Rena frowned, her gaze moving back and forth between them. She didn't sound fine. She sounded like she was begging. Muriel's lips parted, but Kalen stepped slightly forward, blocking part of her from view. "You're mistaken. We had an argument, that's all. Families argue. But everything's under control." The tone of his voice was polite, even measured, but the subtle authority behind it was undeniable. Rena's eyes narrowed. She stepped inside despite his stance. "I'm not leaving until I know she's okay." Muriel's breath caught. This was her chance. Her sister's presence was the first real crack in Kaylin's control. She tried to speak, but Kaylin's hand brushed lightly against her arm. Not rough, not violent, but firm enough to remind her of the invisible leash around her throat. Muriel swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "Rena, Kaylin's gaze cut to her, sharp, cold. A warning. Rena's voice hardened. "What is going on here?" "Muriel, look at me." Tears welled in Muriel's eyes. She met her sister's gaze, her lips trembling, but before she could speak, Eloan's voice carried down the stairs. "Auntie Rena." The little girl rushed into the room, her face lighting up as she wrapped her arms around her aunt. Rena bent down, hugging her tightly, her eyes darting over the child's wrists, the faint marks still there. Her chest tightened. "Eloan," she whispered, "are you okay?" Eloan nodded innocently, smiling. "Daddy saved me." Rena's gaze snapped to Kaylin. Save her from what? The silence that followed was suffocating. Kaylin's jaw clenched, his eyes locking with Rena's. For the first time, his calm veneer cracked just slightly. Muriel's tears broke free. She pressed a hand to her mouth, choking back sobs. The truth was clawing its way out, no matter how hard Kaylin tried to bury it. Rena stood, her voice firm. "I don't know what's happening here, but I'm not leaving without answers." Kaylin stepped closer, his presence overwhelming the room. His voice was low, steady, but edged with threat. "Then you'd better be prepared for the answers you're demanding." Rena didn't flinch. She tightened her hold on Eloan, her eyes unyielding. "Try me." Muriel's breath hitched. She had never seen Kaylin challenged like this. For the first time, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not just anger, but calculation, as though he was deciding whether Rena would walk out of this house at all. The tension was unbearable. Muriel's heart pounded, her throat dry. She knew whatever happened next would break everything wide open. Kaylin turned his gaze back to her, his voice low, cutting through the room like a blade. "Muriel, it's time to tell your sister the truth." Her knees buckled. Tears streamed down her cheeks. The weight of both their stares pressed her into the floor. She realized there was no escaping anymore. The truth, all of it, was about to come crashing into the open. And with it, the fragile threads of their family would finally tear apart. The room was frozen in silence. Rena's arms remained protectively around Eloan, while Muriel stood trembling, her tears dripping onto the wooden floor. Kaylin's words hung in the air like a death sentence. "It's time to tell your sister the truth." Rena's eyes darted between them, confusion and fury mixing on her face. "Truth about what? What the hell happened here?" Kaylin stepped forward, his broad shoulders casting a shadow across the kitchen. His calmness was more terrifying than shouting. "Tell her, Muriel." Muriel shook her head frantically, her voice cracking. "I can't." "Kaylin, please." "Tell her," he repeated, his voice sharp, final. Rena gripped Muriel's hand, trying to anchor her. "Whatever this is, you can tell me. You're safe with me." The word safe made Muriel break. Her sobs burst out as she fell against her sister. "He's gone, Rena. Alaric is gone." "Kaylin." He made him disappear. Rena's body stiffened. Her eyes shot to Kaylin. "Disappear? What do you mean, disappear?" Kaylin's jaw tightened. He didn't look away. "She's not lying. Alaric Dravorn will never be seen again." Rena's breath caught. She pulled Eloan closer to her side, her voice rising. "You're admitting this in front of your daughter? In front of me? What did you do to him?" Kaylin's eyes flicked to Eloan, softening only for her. "I did what had to be done." Rena's voice shook with disbelief. "You killed him?" The silence that followed was louder than any answer. Muriel collapsed into a chair, her hands clutching at her hair. "He planned it, Rena. From the start. Alaric wasn't some random man. Kaylin knew him before. He let him into this house because of me." Rena's face twisted in horror. "You what? You had an affair with him?" Muriel nodded weakly, shame consuming her. "I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what he'd done." Kaylin's voice cut through, sharp, commanding. "Enough." He stepped closer, his presence dominating the room. His gaze locked onto Rena's. "You want the truth? Fine. I'll give it to you." The air grew heavier as he spoke, his voice steady but edged with years of buried rage. Alaric wasn't just the man your sister betrayed me with. He was the reason my brother, the Los, is dead. Overseas, in a mission that went wrong because Alaric abandoned him. My brother bled out in the dirt while Alaric walked away. Rena's eyes widened, her grip tightening around Aloan. My God, Kalen's voice grew colder. I've hunted him ever since. I waited years for the right moment. And then Miriel, in her weakness, gave me exactly what I needed. She opened the door. She put him under my roof. And I made the call that ended him. Miriel sobbed harder, covering her face. I didn't know. I didn't know who he was. Kalen turned his head toward her, his tone harsh. You didn't care. That's worse. Rena's face flushed with anger. You're telling me you used your own wife, your child, as bait for your revenge? Kalen's eyes flickered just for a second. Then he steadied. I didn't want Aloan harmed. But Alaric couldn't resist leaving scars. That's who he was. And now she knows what evil looks like. Rena shook her head in disgust. No, Kalen. What she knows now is that the man she calls father is just as dangerous. You've traumatized her forever. Kalen's jaw twitched. For the first time, his calm cracked. His voice rose, deep and thunderous. Everything I did was for her. For Aloan. For the Los. Don't you dare compare me to that coward. Aloan flinched at the roar, her small hands clutching Rena's arm. Tears brimmed in her eyes as she whispered, Daddy. The sound shattered the room. Kalen's fury halted instantly. His chest heaved, his hands trembling as he looked at his daughter, the one pure thing left. His eyes softened, guilt flashing across his face. He took a slow step toward her. Aloan, I'm sorry. I never wanted you to be afraid of me. Rena pulled the girl back protectively, her eyes blazing. Stay away from her. Kalen froze, his outstretched hand lingering in the air. His wife wept, his sister-in-law glared, and his daughter's trust hung by a fragile thread. The truth was out. The mask had fallen. And now, every choice he had made, every lie, every secret, every plan was on the table. But in Kalen's mind, one thing was clear. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of the reckoning. The kitchen felt like a battlefield. The three women, Miriel sobbing in her chair, Rena standing rigid with Aloan in her arms, and Kalen looming in the center, were locked in a standoff where words were sharper than knives. Kalen's confession still echoed. Alaric was gone, the Los avenged, and the entire nightmare had been orchestrated by him. The air carried the weight of everything unsaid, the betrayal, the fear, the unspoken truth that nothing could return to normal. Rena's voice cut through the suffocating silence, sharp and trembling. You think this is justice? You think your daughter will grow up safe because of this? She'll grow up broken, Kalen. She'll remember the night you let a monster into her home. And she'll remember the night her father admitted he was no different. Kalen's jaw tightened. He took a step forward, his voice rising. I am different. I ended him. I made sure he can never touch her again. Aloan whimpered softly, hiding her face in Rena's shoulder. The sound pierced Kalen like a blade. He froze, staring at the little girl who had once only looked at him with pure trust. Now her body recoiled. Daddy, her voice was small, uncertain. Why are you scary now? Kalen's chest heaved. The words shattered something deep inside him. He knelt, trying to meet her eyes. His voice cracked, softer than it had been in years. I'm not scary, little one. I just wanted to protect you. Rena stepped back, her grip tightening around the child. Her eyes burned. No, you wanted revenge. You put her in harm's way because you couldn't let go of the past. That's not protection. That's obsession. Miriel sobbed harder, her voice hoarse. Kalen, look at her. Look at what you've done. You've lost her. You've lost us. The words hung in the air, heavier than any threat. For the first time, Kalen's face faltered. His shoulders slumped, his eyes glossing with something dangerously close to regret. But the soldier in him fought to stay alive. He rose slowly, his voice low, steady, almost pleading. I lost my brother. I couldn't lose her too. Everything I've done was to make sure Aloan never lives in fear again. Rena's voice snapped back. And yet, right now, she's afraid of you. The final blow landed. Kalen's composure cracked. He turned away, his hands gripping the edge of the counter until his knuckles whitened. His chest rose and fell in uneven bursts. Muriel pushed herself shakily to her feet, her eyes red and swollen. For once, she found a sliver of courage. Kaylin, it's over. Whatever war you've been fighting in your head, it's done. If you want to be a father, you have to stop being a soldier. The room went still. Kaylin didn't move, didn't speak. The only sound was Alohan's quiet sniffles. Then, slowly, Kaylin released the counter. He turned, his face hollow, stripped of the fury and control that had defined him. He looked at Alohan, the only thing that had ever truly mattered. His voice trembled. I'm sorry, little one. Alohan's eyes filled with tears. She buried her face deeper into Rena's shoulder. She didn't answer. Kaylin's body stiffened at the rejection. His heart cracked, but he didn't fight it. He knew, in that moment, he had already lost her. Rena's voice was firm. I'm taking them out of here. You need help, Kaylin. More help than I can give. But they're not safe with you like this. Kaylin didn't argue. His silence was his surrender. He simply stepped aside, his tall frame moving out of the way of the doorway. Muriel clutched Rena's arm as they moved toward the door. Her tears fell freely, but there was relief in them too. A fragile hope that maybe escape was possible. As they stepped into the daylight, Kaylin stood alone in the dim kitchen. The sound of the front door shutting echoed like the end of a war. He sank into a chair, his hands covering his face. For the first time in years, the soldier broke. The Avenger was gone. What remained was just a man, a father who had won his revenge, but lost the very family he swore to protect. The house was silent once more. But this time, the silence wasn't heavy with secrets. It was empty. Kaylin whispered into the emptiness, his voice breaking. The Los. I kept my promise. But at what cost? The screen fades to black.